Hello，你好，Welcome back，欢迎回来to Wisdom Wednesday with Johnny Tiger on September. September? Yeah, it is September, isn't it? Yeah. So, sorry, it's a little bit late. In fact, another few more minutes, this will turn into a Thursday something video rather than Wisdom Wednesday. So let's try this again. It's September 8th, 2021. And so far, it's still a Wednesday. Now, it's been a long day. A lot of things needed to get done, and a lot of things have been accomplished. Been a good day, and but just a little bit too hectic and busy for my liking. And that sound you just heard is a kitten, Aslan, who actually just turned 1 year old a few days ago. So happy birthday, Aslan. You are not a kitten anymore. You are now adult, officially an adult cat. So you shouldn't be causing trouble. Although that doesn't seem to matter to them one bit. Um, I don't know how many of you watching my videos, watching my channels, might be watching this while you're sitting back, having a drink, maybe a glass of wine in your hand, or a mug of beer, a can of beer in your hand, or if you're like me, a glass of whiskey in your hand. I don't know how many of you have watched the video while enjoying a little bit of leisurely drinking. Now, some of my friends have teased me before about some of my Survival Saturday or Tactical Tuesday, usually the weekend video, were made after I came home from being out and drinking with friends, and supposedly I sounded kind of drunk on those videos. I don't think so. I think that making that part up, I went back and watched those videos. I sounded fine. I sounded just as clear-headed and intelligent as ever. But anyway, so people have teased me about that a little bit. Uh, so yes, I do do a little bit of social drinking. I, however, very, 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 very rarely drink at home. Uh, in fact, I'm one of those people that if you come to my house, uh, if you come to my kitchen, as my friend Kevin pointed out, I look like I live like a monk. It's all healthy stuff. There's no cookies, no chocolate, no soda in the fridge. There's no alcohol anywhere. So I very rarely drink it when I'm at home. If I'm drinking at home, most likely I am dealing with some immense amount of stress. I'm really depressed, or I'm super, super bored. Those are the only incidences that would cause me to drink at home. But when I go out with friends, I don't mind throwing back whiskey, and beer, and wine, and champagne, whatever is on the table that we are drinking for the time. I enjoy being able to carry on good conversation and being able to keep some good company while feeling that little bit of a light buzz in the head. Alcohol and I, we've been old acquaintances. My first my first taste of alcohol was maybe when I was 6 years old, when my grandfather, having a drink with his lunch, jokingly offered if I asked me if I would try it, and me being curious and young and didn't know what I was doing, I said yes, and he gave me a taste of his beer, and I thought it was the most awful tasting thing in the world, and I didn't feel any need to continue that acquaintanceship with alcohol, and it wasn't until I was uh, 8 or 9 years old, maybe a little bit older, maybe 10 years old, during a trip to Japan to visit one of my uncles there. Yeah, I'm Taiwanese, but I have a uncle in Japan. Not a real uncle, but he's a really good friend of my father's. I went to visit Uncle Suzuki, and Uncle Suzuki liked to make his own fruit wine in the backyard, and he offered for us kids to try some. Now, those things that were not very strong, the percentage, alcohol percentage was not very high, but they sure tasted good. And uh, that was my first positive experience with alcohol. Was around 9, 10 years old. By the time I was 12, I was knocking back beer like adult, and I remember when I was 13 or 14, me and my mom went on a fun trip to Malaysia and Singapore. And my mom and I got into a drinking contest with each other. I still remember I knocked back about 24 cans of beer that night. And my mom basically had to help carry me back to the hotel room. So yeah, I went through ups and downs with alcohol when I was young and teenager. Uh, Definitely had some good time, had some bad time, and almost became a full-blown alcoholic when I was 15, 16 years old, and was lucky enough to be able to snap out of it and get my life back on track before it was too late. So all that pre-rambling, all that long-winded talk about myself makes this sound like a Soul Search Sunday, but it's not. If you bear with me a little bit longer, we will get to the main topic, which actually is about alcohol. A few years ago, I was at a wedding, and one of my really, really good friends tricked me into a drinking contest, and we were supposed to be drinking tequila. Well, long story short, I was drinking tequila, he was drinking water, but me being blind, I couldn't see, so I thought he was drinking tequila. So, needless to say, I drank myself silly. Uh, it turned out to be a bit of a blessing in disguise that he tricked me like that because after that I was so leery about getting into any more drinking contests with anybody else. So when I took a trip to China, I did not get goaded into any uh, drinking contest with people there. I actually watched my alcohol intake. I was very, very cautious. So I did not have any unfortunate or embarrassing incidents in China. Maybe my friend tricking me with that little contest that wasn't really a contest was a good thing after all. Now, Chinese people like to drink, and people all over the world like to drink. Uh, in Mandarin, the word for alcohol is 酒, 酒, J-O-U, 酒. Joe. Uh, Incidentally, that is the same word, same pronunciation for number nine, Joe. Number nine is Joe. Alcohol is also Joe. To drink alcohol, to enjoy alcohol, is called 喝酒. 喝, like H-E-R, like her. 喝酒. 喝酒 means drink alcohol. A lot of people like to 喝酒. A lot of people like to drink alcohol. In many, many places, people want to put rules on it. People want to talk bad about alcohol. And indeed, if you have too much alcohol, it is bad for you. There's no arguing that. But alcohol has a massive, massive history and connection with human society, longer than a lot of us realize, longer than a lot of other stuff, such as education, uh, drug, uh, uh, clothing, and a lot of those things that we tend to hold in higher regard. So when was human beings' first interaction with alcohol? when did we first got exposed to this evil poison? This is going to blow your mind, like it probably like it did mine. Our first interaction, historically, that has been proven by scientists, our first interaction with alcohol was about 14 million years ago. 14 million years ago. Now, some people are going, well, that's not right because there wasn't any human 14 million years ago. And you're right, there was no human 14 million years ago. But our ancestors, the apes, the primates, the monkeys, were already here. Now, this is an interesting fact. Uh, Prior to 14 million years ago, the remains of fossils from monkeys and apes from prior to 14 million years ago showed no sign of the enzyme and uh, uh, components that needed to digest alcohol. There's nothing in their system that were made to digest alcohol. But somewhere around 14 million years and forward, all the remains, all the fossils, show a large amount of enzyme and proteins and traces of these alcohol digesting tools that our body suddenly started to reproduce. What is even more surprising was all the way back from 14 million years ago, these monkeys and apes, the amount of residue from digesting alcohol in their body was as high as 40 times more than what is strictly biologically necessary. 40 times higher, which means 14 million years ago, their alcoholic intake were almost as high as we have today. So how did these apes and monkeys had access with to alcohol? 14 million years ago, the Earth underwent a massive change. A lot of forest died out, and plains and flat land replaced the forest. So our ancestors moved from the tree down to living on flat surfaces. No longer able to find enough fresh fruit on the tree to sustain themselves, our ancestors started picking up rotting, decaying fruit from the ground just because uh, it's easier that way. And of course, we know that decaying, rotting fruit often generate a huge amount of alcohol. Um, Nowadays, we see a lot of black bears and other animals that eat fruit that are too ripe, and they actually become kind of drunk. So our ancestors ran into that, and a lot of them somehow, somewhere along the line, decided, hey, these fruit, they make us feel really good. So they started to eat a lot of them. So even from 14 million years ago, our monkey ancestors were having a good old time with ripe, overripe fruit that contain large quantity of alcohol. And some people say, well, that's kind of far-fetched. You're going way back 14 million years ago, and you're talking about monkeys. How about human? How when we were actually humans, uh, what did alcohol actually did for us? How did alcohol come about? This is also very interesting. Um, One of our first acts of improving our standard when we first became what we can assume or classify as modern human was when we learned to grow things, when we learned to farm, and when we learned agriculture. This happened around 9,000 years BC, which means about 11,000 years ago. Prior to that, we were scavengers, we were gatherers. We go into the forest, find whatever we could, and kill whatever we could, and we eat it. We didn't grow our own food. We only started growing our own food uh, about 9,000 years BC. And the reason for that was not for food. We learned how to farm, we learned agriculture because we wanted to make beer. I know, that sounds totally crazy, right? A lot of people thought that we first started to grow wheat and oats because we wanted to make bread. But our archaeologists have found that bread only existed about 6,000 years BC, while long before that, the 3,000 years prior to that, there were clay vessels and containers that were found that have traces of alcohol and beer in them. So we were making beer long before we were making bread. Uh, we were uh, growing oats and grain because we wanted to make beer. Now, how did this come about? Well, I am just Johnny Tiger here to talk about what I know. It's been such a long time in the history, so I can't say that my version is right and whatever. So just take it under advisory. It's entertainment, and you can go Google it, and uh, hopefully I'm not too far wrong. But this is my take on the series of events as proven by scientists and archaeologists. About 9,000 BC, there was a group of hunters and gatherers. You can say they were our ancestor human. And they went out into the woods and came back with a lot of wild oats and wild wheat. And they started having a great feast. But then some of them decided, this is kind of boring. We need some meat to go with this. We should have some meat. Now, this grain-fed lifestyle is kind of dry and bland. So they decided to go hunting. So all the wheat and oats that were not finished, they put them in a large container, like a large barrel, and left them in the village. Well, back then they didn't know about how to make airtight container and stuff like that. So they just left these wheat and oats in the barrel and they went off to hunt. Now people back then they didn't just like go hunting in the daytime and come back at night. Usually it take days, sometimes weeks to catch a prey and then to butcher it and to bring it back to the village. So they were gone for a long time. While they were gone, there were times when it rained, and the rain filled up the barrel and soaked the oats and the wheat, and then the sun came up, and the wheat and the oats started to germinate, and then it rained again, and then the sun would shine again, and this repeated process started to make the oats and the wheat uh, go undergo chemical change, and they started to dissolve and decay and ripen and rotting in the rainwater in the barrel. By the time the hunters came back with their meat, these barrels were filled with this dark looking sludge that smelled really strong, and they didn't know what it was. They thought maybe they should throw it out, but some people say, let's try it. Maybe it tastes good. You don't know. It looked kind of interesting. So they tried it, and they really liked it. And then they started to do this on purpose. They started to leave the oats and wheat in barrels and let it decay, let it rot, and let it dissolve in water, and then drinking the results. That was our first beer that was made 9,000 years BC. And gradually, people suddenly realized that by drinking this sludge, people were becoming bigger. Well, we all know what beer do to us, make you fatter. But that's just because we have too many good food now. so there's too much excess calorie. But back then, can you imagine this? Back then, when people didn't have all the good right nutrients, they sometimes have to go days without eating. Drinking this beer was great. This all these extra calories actually made people stronger and bigger, fatter, and people realized that when they were drinking these, they felt good. They were happy. Some of them had make more children, and some of them could hunt better. So this became something of a godsend to people about 9,000 years BC, and then people decided, wow, this is great. We need to plant oats and wheat so we can make these more often. So you see, without alcohol, without the discovery of alcohol, we might not have uh, learned how to grow food. That is just how important alcohol has in the history of human development. I know this episode is very different from usual. This is not a Chinese eccentric episode, but I figured that this is a little change of pace and maybe quite interesting as well. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed it. I'll be back again tomorrow for Toys Thursday. For now, have a good night and 再见.